The version of me that walked into rooms, the version that existed in the perception of other people, was assembled over years with a level of care I would not have admitted to at the time. Not because I was dishonest, exactly. The pieces were all real. The opinions I expressed were opinions I held. The interests I mentioned were interests I actually had. But there was a selection process operating underneath everything, and that process was not neutral. It was optimization. I was showing the version that would be received well, that would generate the kind of response I needed, that would hold its shape under the mild pressure of being known by other people. And I was doing it so fluently that for a long time I did not experience it as performance. I experienced it as myself. His name is Marcus, and he has known me for 9 years, and he was the one who finally named it. Not in an accusatory way. In the way of someone who had been watching a pattern long enough that he trusted himself to say what he saw. He said, "I don't always know what you actually think about things. I know what you say. I know how you engage. But sometimes I have the feeling that you're standing slightly behind the thing you're presenting." I deflected the first time he said it. I made a joke about being Midwestern, about cultural inheritance of emotional management. He laughed, which I had calculated he would, and we moved on. But the sentence stayed. I would find it in my head in quiet moments, in the hour before sleep, on long drives. I don't always know what you actually think. Standing slightly behind the thing you're presenting. The version I had assembled started, I think, in the specific environment of being new somewhere. I moved for graduate school at 23, to a city where I knew nobody, into a department with its own culture and status structure and unspoken protocols. The way to enter that environment without cost was to read it first, to watch, to understand what it valued, to present the aspects of yourself that mapped onto those values. This was not a cynical strategy. It was survival. It was how a person with no existing social capital in a new place builds the foothold that makes the rest possible. And it worked. Within a year I had relationships, a reputation, a position in the informal social architecture of the department. The method had succeeded. What I did not notice was that the method had also continued. The reading, the selecting, the optimizing, these did not stop when the immediate survival need had passed. They became habit. They became the automatic mode of being in any room with other people present. And because the feedback was so consistently positive, because the assembled version was genuinely well received, because people seemed to like and trust and want to spend time with the version I was presenting, there was no signal telling me to stop. There is something particular about being well received for a performance. It is not the same as being received for yourself. I understood this abstractly. But understanding something abstractly and feeling its weight in the body are different operations. I had accumulated a substantial social life, good relationships, a sense of belonging in communities I genuinely valued, and underneath all of it was this quiet unease that I kept not examining. The unease was the gap. The gap between what people were responding to and the part of me that was doing the responding. The applause going to the character while the actor stood slightly off to the side, watching. I started to notice specific moments of dislocation. A dinner party where I gave an opinion on something I had given careful thought to, and the opinion was well received, and I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not warmth, not the particular pleasure of being understood. Just the technical fact of having produced the desired response. A conversation where someone told me something difficult and I gave what I knew was the right response, the attentive, generous, thoughtful response, and felt the absence of actual engagement beneath the competent execution. I was running a program. The program was good. I was not inside it. What Marcus's comment did was name this absence. Not with precision, not with a full diagnosis, but with enough accuracy that it caught. Standing slightly behind the thing you're presenting. The spatial metaphor was right. There was always a small distance. I was never quite in the room in the way that the assembled version appeared to be. The discomfort of this recognition was not simple. Because embedded in the recognition was an obvious question I had been avoiding: if this version is not real, then what is? What had I been protecting, exactly, behind the performance? What was the thing that had been standing back there in the shadow of the presented self all this time? I didn't know. That was the most unsettling answer. After years of careful, continuous assembly, after the accumulation of all those social successes, all that evidence of belonging, I had lost clear access to the shape of what I actually thought, actually wanted, actually found interesting or tedious or meaningful. Not entirely. But more than was comfortable to admit. The editing had been thorough enough that I had edited myself in the process. The work of recovering that was slower and stranger than I expected. It involved something like deliberate clumsiness. Saying things in rooms and watching myself not immediately calibrate the sentence for the audience. Offering real opinions on small things, on restaurants, on books, on how to spend an afternoon, without the half-second optimization pass. It felt exposed in a way that the word exposure doesn't quite capture. The exposure of the real thing is different from the exposure of a performance. When the performance fails, you adjust the performance. When the real thing is received badly, there is nowhere to stand. Marcus was patient with this period in a way that cost him something, I think. I was less smooth. I said things that didn't land the way things I said had previously landed. I contradicted positions I had held, because the positions had been held by the assembled version and the thing that was emerging had different ones. He found some of this disorienting and said so. But he also said, near the end of a long conversation about all of it, that he preferred it. That this was what he had meant. That this was the version he had been trying to see. I don't think the assembled version was fraudulent. I want to be careful about that. The opinions were real. The interests were real. The care for the people in my life was real. But it was curated in ways I could not have justified if I had been asked to justify them, and the curation had a cost that compounded quietly over years. The cost was the distance. The small gap between myself and my own experience of being in a room with other people. The sensation of watching myself perform a self rather than simply being one. I still catch the optimization running sometimes. I notice the half-second calculation before I say something, the small internal adjustment for the room. When I catch it, I try to ask whether the adjustment is genuine, whether I am actually choosing how to say something, or whether I am choosing what to say based on what will be received. The first is tact. The second is something different. The line is narrow and worth watching. What I know now is that the gap can close. Not all the way, not permanently. There is always some version of performance in social life, some selection, some construction. But the gap between the assembled version and the person doing the assembling can narrow to something that doesn't cost as much. And in that narrower space, something like actual presence becomes possible. The room feels different when you are actually in it. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real. Do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable, it builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.